But we start with the big news of the day. India and China have agreed to end the standoff on the Doklam plateau. A statement from India's External Affairs Ministry said, and I quote, expeditious disengagement of border personnel at the face-off site at Doklam has been agreed to and is ongoing, end quote. The statement added that the two countries had been in touch diplomatically on the issue for some time. It said that India had conveyed its views, its concerns and interests to the Chinese. Now, the standoff began on the 16th of June when Chinese troops began laying a road on the plateau. China claimed ownership of the plateau, even though Bhutan also claims ownership. The two sides have held several rounds of discussions on it. Inconclusively, there was an understanding which included India that neither side would alter the status quo on the ground. China's road building violated that understanding. Now, at Bhutan's request, India sent in troops to stop the Chinese road building. This was the first time that India has intervened in support of a third country against China. And joining me in the studio to talk more about this latest disengagement, if you will, is renowned author, columnist, political reporter and, of course, writer right here in our studio, Tavleen Singh. Ma'am, thanks so much for speaking with us here at WION. At the outset, if I can just ask you to make sense of these, let's say, conflicting statements we've received from the Indian External Affairs Ministry and what's being reported to have been said by the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
Well, nobody can make sense of that until they clarify that themselves. But what is clear is, at least to me, is that India, for the first time that I can remember, actually stood its ground and said to China, we're not backing off. You know, no more picnics in Ladakh and, you know, building roads in Bhutan, etc. And as an Indian, that really pleases me, that, you know, that we stood our ground.
And what do you think has been really, we've seen, you know, different statements coming about since the 16th of June. India's always been stoic. It's not, you know, been over the top or shrill like we've seen a lot of the Chinese foreign ministry statements have been. But there's this whole question about the Prime Minister's participation in BRICS. Do you think that has had something to do with the way this announcement has been made today?
Personally, I never took it that seriously, the Doklam standoff. I thought that really all the way along it was just China's little sideshow, and that its main show was on the North Korean border. Right. Because actually the North Korea standoff with the American president is a much more serious concern to China than, you know, than building a road in Bhutan. Right. And I think that that was very underreported in India because the Indian media tends to ignore what's going on in the rest of the world. So we've almost heard nothing about what's been going on. If you were living in India and you didn't read the Western press, right, you wouldn't even know how serious that standoff was. And, you know, I was just saying earlier to someone that I happened to be in Europe when it came to a head, the standoff on the North Korean border, and there were reports that the Chinese had moved huge amounts of troops up to that border, you know, when he was doing missile after missile, day after day. And in India, we were still going on about Doklam. So, you know, to me, I could be wrong, but I always thought of the Doklam as a sideshow. All right.
I'll take that on the chin, the bit about the Indian media being insular about certain things. But talking about
the Indian people are not interested in anything that goes on outside our borders.
And that's often an accusation leveled at other countries. That's an interesting point you make. Now,
the only other country that actually you can say that about is America.
Yes.
Because we're too big and we have too many problems of our own. Otherwise, you know, most other countries pay attention, especially if they're small countries.
But do you think, you know, keeping in mind what's happened, of course, the United States has again made reference to North Korea's ballistic missiles program, and that has come up in the news again in the last couple of days. Do you think, going by what you just mentioned, that has also made China look at Doklam slightly differently?
Well, you know, I don't think they're connected, but Kim Jong-un, who is, as we know, you know, a little bit of a kind of nutcase, but he's backed down too. Now, he could not have backed down unless the Chinese had leaned on him pretty heavily, because whatever the Chinese might say, North Korea acts at the behest of China. And I think that they were really worried by the end because, you know, he was showing signs of being almost out of control with his threats. And then, you know, we had Donald Trump also responding pretty much in Kim Jong-un's language with that fury and fire
yes.
and all that kind of thing, and you're going to see hell like you've never seen it. So it sounded as though he was about to nuke North Korea, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what caused the North Korean standoff to calm down, but it has calmed down. It calmed down, I think, about a week ago.
Right, and the only person perhaps, or the only country one can perhaps look at as having that kind of sway over North Korea is China. But coming back to Doklam, this morning when the news broke about the statement from the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, the Indian media again was very quick to jump to this assumption that this is a mutual agreement for disengagement to take place. Since then we've heard a very different sort of tone and tenor from the Chinese Foreign Ministry per usual. Do you think that, this, as much as this might be called a calming down of the stalemate in some ways, that there is a lot of time between now and BRICS, and if there is to be another flashpoint, as we saw in Ladakh a week or so ago, that might change the status quo between the two countries once again?
Look, the status quo between India and China cannot change.
All right.
Because China has no interest whatsoever in accepting India as an equal. So I actually believe that what they're doing, not just in Doklam and in Ladakh, but in Pakistan, is to make it clear to us that they have the money and the power to always be ahead of us in this game. So we've, in any case, had our differences on their, OBOR, that road
right.
that they're building, and CPEC, but certainly I don't see any changing in the status quo. And, we thought, because in India we don't report foreign news. WION is actually an exception that you have more foreign news on your channel than others do. But here we tend to really be sort of, navel-gazing all the time. But, just because Xi Jinping had a little swing with Modi in Gujarat when he became Prime Minister, it doesn't change anything.
Right.
The Chinese have a very clear policy towards India. It's India that I believe has always been weaker, always shown a kind of weakness whenever the Chinese have tried to intimidate us.
But not this time.
But this is the first time I see it, because when they were on the swing together in Gujarat and in the Sabarmati ashram.
Yes.
If you remember, in Ladakh, the Chinese sent in some
simultaneously
troops to have a little picnic on our side of the border, and they were making faces at our troops. So I think that the Chinese really are used to bullying India
right.
into accepting that it is the superpower, where, for Asia that's fine, but they want to be the superpower in South Asia as well. And so, the status quo is not going to change from their point of view. And if they've made a statement contradicting our foreign minister, it's just to show us once more that, they don't care. They really,
right.
They want to treat us like a kind of inferior power.
Okay. Let's see if some of the other people we've heard from have had similar reactions as yours. Tavleen Singh's going to stay with us here in the studio, but let's listen in to some of the reactions that have come in since those two statements were made public a little while earlier.
It is a tremendous diplomatic victory for our country that both the country's armies have agreed to pull back. This standoff was going on since about 2 months, and despite Chinese threats through media that we should withdraw, otherwise there will be a war, we were hanging on there. All the credit goes to the government decision to hang on there, and that's why we have got a diplomatic victory.
It's a huge, huge, huge victory for India. Right from day one, India had been suggesting that the only solution to this issue is that both countries withdraw back to the positions that they occupied on the 16th of June and thereafter indulge in a dialogue. We showed unbelievable maturity in the face of threats, and nothing worked as far as China is concerned. In the ultimate analysis, China has realized that China has stood totally exposed in front of the world.
The breakthrough between the two big countries, India and China, is a great message for both the countries. It is a very happy situation that both countries have agreed to withdraw their forces from the Doklam plateau. This message will go that both such big countries can solve their problems among themselves without involving any nation, like UNO and other countries also.
Ma'am, would you call this a victory, or do you feel this development goes beyond the simple binary of winning and losing?
I don't see it as a victory, but I see it, as I said to you, I'm very proud as an Indian that the Indian Prime Minister did not back down.
Right.
We constantly back down when China tries to bully us, and I'm very happy that we didn't this time. But what's the victory? And I really hope that we'll be able to convince Bhutan that we are there to protect them, because the Chinese, I read this morning, are planning to pour in billions of dollars into Bhutan. And if they do that, because they have more money than we do, then, you know, they have a chance of influencing Bhutan. And Bhutan has always been one of the countries that India has looked after. So, you know, I mean, I think that India standing her ground on behalf of Bhutan will, I hope, convince the Bhutanese that we are there, that, you know, we're not going to run for our lives.
Right. In fact, you know, Twitter agrees with you in many ways. I've been tracking the developments, and a lot of people have come out and congratulated Prime Minister Modi as this being an individual victory for him. And the interesting thing is we've not heard him mention Doklam much at all.
Good.
He kept it out of the speech on 15th of August. And I think
Xi Jinping
strategically
hasn't mentioned it either.
Absolutely. So do you think that this is the first time perhaps also we're seeing, you know...
a dignity to the Prime Minister's position, you know? Instead of going wah, 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 which we have too many leaders who do that.
Right.
Xi Jinping hasn't mentioned it.
Absolutely, he hasn't. And even on the Indian side, the only references really have been made by the External Affairs Minister in the House of itself, and of course Arun Jaitley as the Defence Minister and the Home Minister. And I suppose if I am gleaning from you is that is the way India needs to conduct its foreign policy, especially with an aggressive neighbour such as China. Yeah. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. I think we've been able to touch upon all the major points. Thanks so much. Stay with us though for a minute more. I just want to take our viewers through the fact that as Tadleen Singh was pointing out, for more than 70 days the world has been watching that border standoff between two major Asian powers, and WION has been your window to understanding that conflict. Catch the biggest voices in India and China only on WION as we continue our coverage on the Doklam Plateau.
When the story is China, the destination is WION.
Both sides are not willing to immediately publicly appear to be compromising. Indian side is making some gestures, but Chinese side, at least the media, is not making the gesture.
The sharpest analysis.
If Doklam does not resolve, then such a possibility of an intrusion in another sector where they would have a military advantage may take place.
The widest perspective.
I don't think that China is interested in foreign adventures.
China don't want a war with any country, especially we don't want any war we don't want a China-India war.
The biggest names.
China is mounting pressure. It's waging a psychological war.
And the strongest opinion. WION, Eye on China.